Nora Kelly needs 3 things. First month's rent, a working radiator, and to never, under any circumstances, develop feelings for her landlord. Unfortunately, Finn Sullivan owns the carriage house apartment she just moved into, the restaurant downstairs, and most inconveniently, a pair of hands that make sourdough for a living. Welcome to Flustered novel, where love is chaotic, confessions are awkward, and every story comes with butterflies, drama, and a little emotional damage. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's romance story. Here is a fact about me that will be relevant shortly. I have never once in my life won an argument with a man who owns a cast iron skillet and knows how to use it. I did not know this fact about myself until the morning of October the 4th, when I opened the door of my new apartment to complain about the smell of bacon at 7 a.m., and instead found my landlord standing in his own kitchen doorway wearing jeans, forearms, and absolutely nothing else, holding a spatula like it was a scepter, and he'd been crowned King of Tuesday. "You're up early," he said, like this was a completely normal way to greet a tenant he had met twice. "There's smoke coming under my floorboards," I said, which was not strictly true. There was smell coming under my floorboards. The distinction did not feel important at the time. "That's just the bacon," he said. "Do you want some?" I would like the record to reflect that I said no. I would also like the record to reflect that I was lying, and that 4 minutes later I was sitting at his kitchen island in my pajamas eating the best bacon of my adult life while a shirtless stranger, landlord, I reminded myself, landlord, not stranger, worse than a stranger, asked me if I liked my eggs confident or polite, which apparently meant runny or not. And I said confident. And something in my chest did a small, unauthorized flip. This is the part of the story where I should tell you that I am not a person who falls for anyone, let alone a man who owns the building I live in and therefore holds, legally and financially, all the power in our relationship. I moved to Maple Hollow, Vermont, to finish a freelance illustration contract, avoid my ex-fiancé's wedding invitation, and live somewhere no one had ever heard of my humiliating breakup. I did not move here to fall in love with a man named Finn Sullivan, who ran the restaurant below my apartment, who could not seem to locate a shirt before 9 a.m., and who, I would come to learn, had exactly one weakness, which was watching people enjoy his cooking. My rent was due in 6 days. I had generously half of it. This should have been the story of how I scraped together money and kept my dignity intact. Instead, it's the story of how I lost both to a man with unfairly nice hands. The ad had said, charming carriage house apartment, above working kitchen, quirky landlord, must love the smell of butter. I should have paid more attention to the word quirky. In my defense, I had scrolled past 400 listings in 3 states, all of which were either haunted, illegal, or priced like Manhattan penthouses despite being, structurally, sheds, and by the time I reached the listing for the apartment above the split ladle in Maple Hollow, Vermont, I had lost the will to be a discerning consumer. I called the number. A man answered on the second ring, sounding distracted, like he was doing 4 things at once, one of which was probably on fire. "Split ladle, this is Finn." "Hi, I'm calling about the apartment listing." "Oh, thank God," he said. "Are you normal?" "I what?" "So the long week. I've shown the apartment to 11 people. One asked if the floor plan was feng shui compliant. One brought a dowsing rod. I'm just trying to establish a baseline before I get my hopes up." I laughed before I could stop myself. I'm reasonably normal. I have a steady freelance income, no pets, and I promise not to bring surveying equipment. "You're hired," he said. "I mean, you can move in. When can you move in?" That should have been my first warning. A man who offered me housing based on a single phone call and a joke about dowsing rods was either desperate or impulsive, and neither quality historically correlates with reliable landlording. But I had a truck rental booked for that Saturday and a storage unit bill accumulating like a slow-motion car crash. So I said, "This weekend?" And he said, "Perfect, I'll leave the key under the fern." And that was that. The carriage house sat behind the restaurant proper, a converted 2-story stone building with a wooden staircase on the outside. The kind that looks romantic in photographs and treacherous in actual New England winters. My apartment was the top floor, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchenette I would never use because the ceilings smelled permanently of someone else's cooking, and a single window that looked directly down into the restaurant's back kitchen through a gap in the curtains that I did not discover until it was, in every sense, too late. I arrived on a gray Saturday with a truck full of boxes, 1 duffel bag of clothes, and the specific brand of exhaustion that comes from packing your entire life into cardboard while your ex-fiancé posts engagement to someone else, photos on social media. I was not, in short, in the market for romance. I was in the market for silence, cheap rent, and a door that locked. The first person I saw at the split ladle was not Finn. It was a teenage boy in a hairnet hauling a bag of flour the size of a golden retriever, who took one look at my truck and yelled, toward the open kitchen door, "Finn, your tenant's here and she's got more boxes than sense." "Excuse you," I said. "He means it as a compliment," the boy said. "Sort of." And then Finn Sullivan came out of the kitchen wiping his hands on a towel, wearing an apron, a t-shirt, actual clothing, looking exactly like what he was, a restaurant owner in the middle of Saturday prep, mildly harried, flour on one cheekbone. And none of it explained the immediate, humiliating way my brain went quiet. "You must be Nora," he said and shook my hand like a normal person. And I thought, fine, this will be fine, he seems normal, this is a landlord, not a plot point. I would like to formally revoke that thought. He helped me carry boxes up the treacherous staircase, made exactly one joke about my alarming quantity of art supplies, showed me where the water shutoff was in case of emergency, and left me with a spare key and the number for the hardware store in town. It was, on paper, the single most boring landlord interaction of my life. It was the next morning that things went sideways, when I woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of someone singing badly to the radio directly below my floor, and made the catastrophic decision to go complain about it in person. For the first 2 weeks, I managed to maintain what I considered a professional distance from my landlord, which is to say I saw him constantly and pretended I didn't notice. This is harder than it sounds when your landlord owns the restaurant 9 feet below your bedroom. I heard him before 6 most mornings, banging around the kitchen with the specific energy of a man who loved his job more than was strictly healthy. I saw him hauling in deliveries, arguing cheerfully with vendors about the price of heirloom tomatoes. And this became a pattern I refused to examine, frequently shirtless, for reasons he explained unprompted, as the ovens run hot and laundry is a scam. I told my best friend Mabel about this over the phone, expecting outrage on my behalf. Instead I got 45 seconds of silence followed by, "So you're telling me your landlord is attractive, employed and cooks?" That is not the point of the story. It is extremely the point of the story. The point of the story, Mabel, is that I have a professional relationship with this man that involves a monthly financial transaction, and I would like to keep it that way. "Aha," Mabel said. "How's the illustration contract going?" "Fine. Slow. I'm 2 weeks behind because I keep getting distracted." By the shirtless landlord. By the raccoon that lives near the dumpster, Mabel focus. She did not focus. She asked me to send a photo of the landlord for safety purposes, and I hung up on her, which she took, correctly, as evidence that I did not trust myself to describe him neutrally. The truth, which I did not tell Mabel, because saying it out loud made it real, was that my freelance contract, a set of 40 children's book illustrations for a publisher in Boston, was in fact going badly, not because of raccoons or landlords, but because my ex-fiancé's new fiancé had, in a display of cosmic pettiness I almost respected, hired the same publisher for her own project. And every email from my editor now arrived with a small, invisible asterisk of dread attached. I was behind on the contract. Being behind on the contract meant being behind on payment. Being behind on payment meant that when October the 31st arrived, rent day, I had generously $600 of the $1,100 I owed. I spent the morning composing and deleting versions of a text message to Finn that all essentially translated to, "I am a financial disaster. Please don't evict me." And then at 11 a.m., someone knocked on my door. It was Finn, wearing a shirt, thank God, holding a folder. "Hey, so rent's due today, I know, I just wanted to say, take whatever time you need, no rush. I don't do the whole late fee thing unless someone's genuinely trying to scam me. And you very much don't seem like you're trying to scam me." I stared at him. "You're not even a little bit worried about your money?" "I mean a little," he admitted. "But mostly I just made too many cinnamon rolls this morning. And I was going to bring you some anyway, so." He held out a small paper bag, grease-spotted, warm. "Consider this a bribe for patience. Metaphorically. Not like an actual bribe. I don't need anything from you, I just," he stopped. Rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm going to stop talking now." "Thank you," I said, taking the bag, absolutely not noticing how his forearms looked when he crossed them, absolutely not noticing anything. "For the record," he added halfway down the stairs, "you don't have to hide in your apartment to avoid me. I don't bite. I do, however, make a genuinely upsetting amount of pastry, so if you ever want to just come down and eat carbs in comfortable silence, the door's open." I closed my door, sat down at my kitchen table, and ate an entire cinnamon roll while staring at the wall, trying to figure out at what point, exactly, my landlord had become a person I thought about. I did not find an answer. I did find that the cinnamon roll was unfortunately perfect. By November, I had developed what I refused to call a routine, and Mabel insisted on calling a courtship. It went like this. I would wake up, hear Finn moving around in the kitchen below, tell myself I was not going to go down there, and then within 20 to 40 minutes, find some reason to go down there. The dumpster was on my way to nowhere in particular. The mail was easier to check from the restaurant side. My need for coffee was admittedly real, but did not require me to drink it perched on a stool at his kitchen counter, watching him work. He never seemed to mind. If anything, he seemed to expect it, sliding a plate toward me without asking, mid-conversation with his sous chef, like my presence at his counter was simply a fact of the morning, the same as the sunrise or the delivery truck. You know, I said one morning, watching him flip a waffle iron closed with more affection than the appliance deserved. For a man running a restaurant, you spend a shocking amount of time feeding one specific unpaying customer. You paid, he said. Eventually. In full. With interest, technically, because you tipped me $40 out of guilt, which I still haven't cashed. That was a mistake. That was very sweet, and also a mistake, yes. Why do you feed me, Finn? He considered this with the seriousness of a man being asked to explain a load-bearing wall. Honestly, I like watching people eat. It's the whole reason I do this job. My therapist says it's because I grew up in a house where nobody sat down for meals together, so now I sort of collect people at my counter. It's not that deep. Except it is a little. Also, he added, sliding a waffle onto my plate, golden and steaming. You make a face when you like something. Right before you take a bite, like you're bracing for disappointment. And then you don't look disappointed. I like that face. I did not have a response prepared for this. I ate the waffle instead. And yes, fine, possibly I made a face. You're doing it right now, he said, delighted. I hate you, I said, meaning something closer to the opposite, and he grinned like he knew it. This was roughly the shape of things for 3 weeks. Waffles, then eggs Florentine, then a disastrous souffle he insisted on serving anyway for scientific purposes. Each morning a little longer than the one before, each conversation drifting a little further from landlord-tenant territory, and into something with no name I was willing to say out loud. It was Mabel visiting for a weekend, who put a name to it anyway. He's in love with you, she announced, watching Finn through the restaurant's back window as he replated a dish for the 3rd time because the color balance was wrong. A level of care that seemed, to her, self-evidently romantic and, to me, simply chef behavior. He's a perfectionist. About food. Nora. He is not making you a souffle, because he's a perfectionist about food. He's making you a souffle because he wants you to have the best souffle you've ever had. Specifically, personally, from him. That's a very specific reading of a baked egg dish. I contain multitudes, Mabel said. So does he, apparently, given the biceps. I threw a dish towel at her, which she caught, laughing, and did not stop bringing up the souffle theory for the rest of her visit. Or frankly, ever again in her life. By December, I had started to suspect, with the paranoid clarity of a woman who has watched too many crime documentaries, that Finn's hospitality had a strategy behind it. Not a sinister one necessarily, but a strategy. The evidence, as I laid it out for Mabel over the phone. Every month, within 24 hours of rent being due, an elaborate breakfast appeared. Not just any breakfast, a shirtless breakfast specifically. On the mornings he claimed the kitchen was too hot to bother with a shirt, which I pointed out, was suspiciously always the exact week I owed him money. You think he's seducing you out of paying rent, Mabel said, in the tone of someone tasting a theory to see if it held up. I think, I said, that every single month, right when I should be handing him a check and having an awkward, business-like conversation about my finances, I am instead sitting at his counter eating pancakes shaped like Vermont, unable to remember my own last name. So the plan is, distract you with breakfast, and you forget to be a responsible tenant. Exactly. Noah, I need you to hear how insane that sounds. I need you to look at his forearms and tell me it's not a strategic weapon. She laughed so hard she had to hang up on me. But I could not shake it, and so in early December rent day, I marched down to the restaurant with my checkbook already filled out, preemptive strike, before the eggs could compromise me, and found Finn at the stove-in, of course no shirt, flipping something that smelled like heaven and looked like trouble. I have a check, I announced, holding it up like a shield. I am handing it to you right now before breakfast, so that there is no ambiguity about the transactional nature of this relationship. Finn turned around, spatula in hand, eyebrows up. Okay. I know what you're doing. Making shakshuka? Distracting me. Every month, right when rent's due, there's a production. A shirtless production. It's suspicious, Finn. To his enormous credit, he did not laugh at me, though I could see it costing him something. He set down the spatula, and this was somehow worse than if he'd laughed, walked over, took the check gently from my hand, folded it, and set it on the counter without looking at it. Nora, I'm not trying to seduce you out of rent. I own 3 restaurants worth of debt, and a very patient bank. I need your rent. What I don't need is a shirt at 7 a.m. in a kitchen with 4 active burners, because I ruin a shirt a week doing this job and I'm not made of money, contrary to what my mortgage suggests. That's a suspiciously reasonable explanation. I contain multitudes, he said, echoing Mabel with an eeriness that unsettled me for weeks. As for the breakfasts, I make breakfast every morning for the staff, for myself, and yes, for you, because you're always awake at the same time I am, and I recognize this is going to sound insane, I like having you there. Not because of the rent. In spite of the rent, honestly, since half the time I forget to actually ask for it. The kitchen was very quiet, except for something simmering that neither of us moved to check. So there's no strategy, I said. The only strategy, Finn said, is that I have been trying for 2 months to work up the nerve to ask if you'd like to have dinner with me somewhere that isn't this kitchen, where I'm not your landlord and you're not worried about a lease, and I keep chickening out and making you waffles instead, because waffles don't require bravery. I looked at the check on the counter. I looked at him. The shuk is burning, I said, which was true, and also the only sentence I could locate in my entire vocabulary. He swore, turned back to the stove, and saved approximately half of it, and neither of us mentioned dinner again for 11 days, which was, in retrospect, a mistake we both regretted. Having failed to have the conversation like an adult, I did what any reasonable woman would do. I overcorrected wildly in the opposite direction. Operation Resist the Landlord, as I privately named it, involved the following rules, which I wrote on a sticky note and adhered to for exactly 9 days. Rule 1. No breakfast in the restaurant kitchen, under any circumstances. Rule 2. Rent handed over via envelope, slid under the door, no personal contact required. Rule 3. Absolutely no acknowledgement of forearms, hands, or the general unfairness of his face. Rule 1 lasted until day 2, when the smell of cardamom rolls defeated me at 9 in the morning, and I told myself that eating breakfast in my own apartment, which he had brought up unprompted, did not violate the spirit of the rule, only the letter. Rule 2 lasted slightly longer, mostly because I was genuinely trying to avoid him until he texted me, "Did you fall in the bathtub? Haven't seen you in 3 days," mildly worried. Also there's soup. And I realized that avoiding a man who owned the building I lived in, ran the restaurant 9 feet from my bed, and had apparently appointed himself my unofficial wellness checker, was a losing strategy from the outset. Rule 3 did not survive contact with the enemy at all. The enemy in this case being Finn, arriving at my door on day 6 holding a toolbox, because my radiator had started making a sound like a dying accordion, and offering to fix it himself rather than call a repairman. Because repairmen in this town take 3 weeks and charge like they're performing surgery. He knelt by the radiator in a t-shirt that had seen better decades, sleeves pushed up, and made a low, satisfied sound when he found the problem, and I stood in my own kitchen experiencing feelings about a plumbing repair that I am not, to this day, proud of. "There," he said, standing, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Should stop rattling. You've got good bones in this place, you know. Old buildings just need someone paying attention." Is that a metaphor? It's a radiator, Nora. Right. So He looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that made the sticky note on my fridge feel increasingly theoretical. "You've been avoiding me." "I have not." "You have. It's fine. I get it." I said a whole thing about dinner and then set food on fire, which is not my most romantic showing, historically. "I just want you to know you don't have to dodge me. If you're not interested, that's completely fine. I'll go back to just being your landlord who occasionally overshares while cooking eggs, no hard feelings." This should have been my exit ramp. This was, in fact, the exact off-ramp I had spent 9 days constructing, sticky note and all. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'm not avoiding you because I'm not interested." Finn went very still. "No. I'm avoiding you because I am extremely interested. And interested is inconvenient because you're my landlord, and I have a truly embarrassing track record of falling for the wrong men at the wrong time. And also I moved to this town specifically to stop doing that." "Okay," Finn said slowly, like a man defusing something delicate. "What if, and hear me out, what if I wasn't the wrong man? That remains to be seen." "Fair. What if we found out? One dinner. Not in the kitchen. Not about rent. Just dinner, like two people who like each other, which for the record, I think we've established that we do. I looked at the radiator, newly quiet, and at him, considerably less quiet, chest still doing the aggravating thing it did. Fine, I said. One dinner. If it's terrible, we go back to pretending this never happened. Deal, he said, and held out his hand to shake on it, which felt absurd and formal and exactly like him, and I shook it, and the handshake lasted at least 4 seconds longer than any handshake needs to. The dinner, against all odds, was not terrible. Finn closed the restaurant early on a Monday, slowest night, don't read into it, and cooked for me at the big table in the empty dining room, candlelight and all, wearing in an apparent nod to the occasion, a shirt the entire evening, which I noted aloud and he called a one-time exception, don't get used to it. We talked for 3 hours. I learned that he'd grown up 2 towns over, the youngest of 4 kids in a house where dinner was whatever came out of a box and got eaten standing at the counter, parents working double shifts, no one sitting still long enough to ask how anyone's day had gone. I learned that he'd started cooking at 14, not out of passion but necessity, and that somewhere along the way necessity had turned into the one thing he was unreasonably good at, and then into a restaurant, then 2, then 3, mortgage to the hilt and terrifying and his, entirely his, the first thing in his life that felt like it belonged to him. I told him about the ex-fiancé, about the engagement that ended 4 months before the wedding when he announced, with the emotional intelligence of a parking cone, that he'd fallen out of love somewhere around the seating chart, about moving to Maple Hollow to become a person who could be alone in a room without it hurting. And are you? Finn asked. A person who can be alone in a room without it hurting? Getting there, I said. Mostly because a very distracting man keeps interrupting the alone part with waffles. I'll take partial credit for that. You can take full credit. It's very annoying. He smiled at that, the real one, not the customer service one he used on strangers, and reached across the table to brush a crumb from the corner of my mouth with his thumb, and the whole restaurant went quiet in the specific way rooms do right before something changes. He kissed me first. I would like the record to reflect that I kissed him back with considerably more enthusiasm than the situation strictly called for, and that it was, without exaggeration, the best kiss I had experienced since approximately the invention of kissing. Well, he said, when we finally broke apart, breathless and grinning like idiots. So much for one dinner. We can revisit the terms, I said. I have several counter-proposals, he said, most of which involve breakfast. Of course they do. I contain multitudes, he said for the third and, thankfully, final time, and kissed me again before I could tell him to retire the phrase. Things were, for 6 blissful weeks, uncomplicated. Then, in late January, a man named Desmond Whitlock came to town wearing a coat that cost more than my monthly rent, offering to buy the entire property, restaurant, carriage house, the treacherous staircase and all, to knock it down and build, in his words, a boutique hospitality experience, which turned out to mean a chain hotel with a lobby bar. Finn's mortgage, it emerged over a tense, quiet conversation at my kitchen table, was more precarious than he'd let on. 3 restaurants meant 3 loans. A slow winter meant thin margins. Whitlock's offer was, by any sane financial measure, a lifeline. Enough money to clear his debts twice over, walk away solvent, maybe even open one smaller, simpler place somewhere with lower rent. You should take it, I said because it was true, and because I loved him enough by then to say true things even when they hurt. If I take it, you lose your apartment, Finn said. And I lose the restaurant my whole life is built around, and Maple Hollow loses the only place in town that isn't a gas station or a chain. And Desmond Whitlock gets to put a rooftop bar where my grandmother's recipe box currently lives, metaphorically. I can find another apartment, Finn. You can't undo a lifetime of debt with stubbornness. Watch me, he said, with the specific, terrifying confidence of a man about to make a decision he had not fully thought through. What followed was 2 weeks I refer to privately as the siege. Finn refusing to sign anything, the whole town somehow finding out and taking passionate sides, a petition circulated at the general store, Mabel driving up unannounced for moral support, that mostly consisted of eating pie and offering opinions, and Whitlock's coat becoming a recurring, ominous character in local gossip. I watched Finn lose sleep over it, watched him run numbers late into the night at my kitchen table, because it was quieter than his, watched the specific exhaustion of a man trying to save something he'd built with his hands out of nothing. And I did something I am not, on reflection, proud of, though I would do it again. I called my old contacts in Boston, the ones from my ex-fiancé's world, the ones with money and a taste for authentic local experiences, and I quietly, without telling Finn, put together a proposal, A small investment group willing to buy in as silent partners, enough to refinance the debt without losing the restaurant, on the condition that Finn kept full creative control. I told him about it 3 days later, terrified, half convinced he'd see it as an overstep, the exact kind of well-meaning interference that had ended my last relationship in a public and humiliating fashion. Finn read the proposal at my kitchen table in complete silence for 11 minutes, which I timed, because I was too anxious to do anything else. "You did this," he said finally, without asking me. "I know. If it's overstepping, I'll cancel it. I couldn't watch you sell your whole life to a man in a bad coat and do nothing." He looked up at me, and whatever I expected, anger, wounded pride, the particular male allergy to being helped, was not what I got. What I got was a man who put the papers down, crossed the kitchen, and kissed me like I'd handed him something considerably more valuable than a business proposal. "Nobody's done anything like this for me before," he said quietly. "Ever." "Get used to it," I said. "I contain multitudes." "Don't," he said. "That's my bit." Whitlock's coat left town in early March, considerably less pleased than it had arrived, and the split ladle stayed exactly where it was, under new modest financing and one silent partner, whom the whole town somehow knew was me within roughly 48 hours, small towns being what they are. Rent, in the strictest legal sense, remained a topic between Finn and me, and became, over the following months, something closer to a running joke than an actual transaction. He tried once in April to simply tear up my lease altogether, an offer I refused on principle, informing him that I would continue to pay rent like a normal, functioning adult, and that if he tried to feed me out of a financial obligation one more time I would report him to whatever governing body oversaw suspiciously charming landlords. "There's no such governing body," he said. "There should be. You'd be their number one case." We settled, eventually, into something that looked, from the outside, exactly like what it was. Two people who lived and worked 12 feet apart, ran errands together, argued about paint colors for the restaurant's back wall, and could not seem to have breakfast without also having, at minimum, one meaningful conversation, and at maximum, several kisses that made the eggs go cold. The whole town, it emerged, had been running an actual betting pool since roughly November, organized by the woman who ran the general store, with categories including first kiss, first fight, and disturbingly specific, first time she moves her easel into his kitchen. Mabel, it also emerged, had placed money on all three and won the entire pool, a fact she announced with the smugness of a woman who had called it from day one and fully intended to be insufferable about it for the rest of both our lives. In late June, on a morning that started, appropriately, with breakfast French toast since it was a Sunday, and Finn had opinions about weekday versus weekend breakfasts that I had stopped questioning. He set a plate in front of me, sat down across the counter instead of standing at the stove as usual, and said, "I have a business proposal for you." "I'm listening." "I'd like to revise the terms of your lease." "Finn, we've discussed this. I am not letting you make my rent free." "That's not the revision," he said, and reached into his apron pocket, and produced, of all the objects in the world, a ring, small and simple and entirely unlike the aggressively large one my ex-fiancé had once presented with the enthusiasm of a man closing a deal. "I'd like to propose we merge the lease, permanently, into one name, mine and yours on the same document, for the same address indefinitely, no notice period, no move-out clause." "Finn Sullivan, are you proposing marriage via property law?" I panicked and led with the metaphor I know best, he admitted. "I also have a normal version of this speech if you want it." "I want both, actually." He gave me both, the property joke, and then after, the real one, quiet and unpolished and entirely sincere, about how he had never once, before me, sat down for a meal without half his attention somewhere else, and how every morning since I moved in he had found some reason to make one more thing, stay 10 more minutes, learn one more fact about how I took my coffee, because none of it had ever felt like enough time, and he did not want to spend the rest of his life measuring our mornings out in individual breakfasts when he could just have all of them, every one, for good. I said yes before he'd finished the sentence, which he still brings up, smugly, to this day. 1 year later, rent still technically due. We got married in October, in the restaurant's dining room, because Finn refused to get married anywhere he couldn't personally supervise the food, and because I could not, in good conscience, deny the town of Maple Hollow a wedding they had, collectively, been emotionally and financially invested in for the better part of a year. Mabel gave a toast that consisted primarily of reading, aloud, the entire betting pool ledger, to enormous applause and at least one demand for a recount from the woman who ran the general store, who still insists she called the wedding date within 3 days. I still live in the carriage house, though the lease, as promised, now carries both our names, a detail Finn brought up so often in the weeks after our wedding that I eventually had it printed on a small plaque and mounted by the door, reading, "This lease is permanent. Rent is paid in full and also in love," which Finn insisted on, not Nora. The gap in the curtains that once let me spy accidentally on my landlord's kitchen has become, officially, my favorite window in the house, mostly because I still like watching him work, still make, apparently, a face right before I take a bite of something he's made me, a fact he still finds delighted and insufferable in equal measure. He has, for the record, started wearing shirts at breakfast. On the grounds that he is a married man now and must, he claims, set a dignified example for the restaurant staff. This lasted exactly through the first heat wave of July, at which point dignity was abandoned entirely, to my considerable and enduring benefit. Whitlock, last anyone heard, opened his boutique hotel 2 towns over, where it is, by all local reports, doing fine, though nowhere near as busy as the Split Ladle, which now has a 2-week wait for weekend brunch and a very small, hand-lettered sign by the register reading "Ask about our landlord special," a joke I did not approve and Finn refuses to take down. I finished the illustration contract, eventually on time, and the publisher liked the work enough to offer another. I no longer check whether my ex-fiancé's name appears in my inbox before opening it, because I have, somewhere in the last year, stopped being a person that fact can reach. And most mornings, still, I wake to the sound of someone singing badly to the radio 1 floor down, the smell of something wonderful drifting up through old, good bones, and I go downstairs. Not because the smoke alarm made me nervous, not anymore, but because some habits, it turns out, were never actually about the smoke at all. The eggs, for what it's worth, remain confident. So do I. Thanks for spending time with Flustered Novel. If this story made you laugh, blush, or scream at the characters, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and come back for more chaotic romance stories. See you in the next novel.